Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. Welcome to Astrofest 2020, a collaboration between SciFest Africa, South Africa's National Science Festival, which is presented virtually this year, and the South African Astronomical Observatory, which celebrates 200 years of existence as an astronomical observatory this month. Congratulations to our colleagues at the SAO. My name is Anya Fourie. I will be your chair for today, and in my other lives, I am a friend of SciFest Africa and SAO, and project director of broader impacts at the National Radio Astronomy Observatory in Charlottesville, Virginia, in the USA. A few front of house rules and requests before I introduce our speaker. We welcome viewers today on Zoom, as well as on the SciFest Africa and SAO Facebook pages. So if you have any questions for our speaker, please post these in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen if you are using Zoom, or in the comment sections if you are joining us via Facebook. Please also understand that because we are broadcasting on these three platforms, the questions will be moderated and we may not have time to ask your question. So please don't hold us too responsible for that. However, what I can tell you is that Professor Sara Seager has a surprise for those of you who ask the best questions, which I will ask her to announce when I hand over to her in a bit. So on 14 September 2020, an international team of astronomers and planetary scientists presented evidence that the cloud tops of the planet Venus contain traces of phosphine, a toxic and rancid gas that is produced by microbial life and some industrial processes that we have here on Earth. But the chemical's presence is a mystery because no known non-biological processes can actually create phosphine in the conditions found on Venus, which really isn't very surprising considering that the surface temperature on Venus is 370 degrees Celsius or 700 degrees Fahrenheit, that it has 90 times the atmospheric pressure of Earth, and that the clouds are primarily made up of sulfuric acid, which is pretty nasty. The alternative is that the phosphine could be the result of some unknown chemical process, which would really be interesting in its own right. It's my privilege to introduce to you today Professor Sara Seager, one of the scientists on the international team that published this discovery and was selected by Breakthrough Initiatives to lead the investigation to confirm the evidence and its implications for the search for life beyond Earth. Sara is the class of 1941 Professor of Planetary Science, Professor of Physics, and Professor of Aeronautics at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, otherwise known to most of us as MIT, an institution which is ranked as the best university in the world for the last 6 years, and really is recognized as a scientific research powerhouse by those who work in astronomy and space research. Exoplanets are planets orbiting a star outside the solar system or the Milky Way. And as of 20 October, the discovery of exoplanets confirmed stood at 4,292. Now, Sara is credited with laying the foundation for the field of exoplanet atmospheres, while her current research focuses on exoplanet atmospheres and the future search for signs of life by way of atmospheric biosignature gases, such as the one found on Venus. She was a part of the team that co-discovered the first detection of light emitted from an exoplanet and the first spectrum of an exoplanet, and of course, the detection of phosphine. She has authored and co-authored over 200 research publications. And if you're in academia, you know that that is quite a feat. She's also authored 4 books. The latest is titled The Smallest Lights in the Universe. And this is a memoir of Sara's search for meaning in the wake of her husband's unexpected death, and as she scours the universe for a 1 in a billion world enough like ours to be able to sustain life. Ladies and gentlemen, a virtual round of applause and welcome, please, for Professor Sara Seager. Over to you, Sara.
Thank you so much, everyone. And good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you are. Can you all hear me okay?
We can.
All right. So today I'm going to talk about exoplanets. I'm going to talk about Venus and the search for signs of life. So for thousands of years, people have wondered what is beyond Earth. When I was a child, I grew up in a city. in Toronto, Canada, actually. And there we could see basically no stars. We actually, when I was about 10 years old, I got to go on my first camping trip and I could see the dark night sky full of so many stars. I wish I could see all of you because I would ask, how many of you have seen the truly dark night sky? Well, I hope you can go and see it soon or see it again, because we know now, we think that every star has planets. All stars are suns. We know of thousands of planets around other stars. We call them exoplanets. And it's just incredible how many planets we know about. It turns out that we have found so many planets, but we haven't yet found a solar system copy. And that's a bit perplexing because it's starting to look like our solar system is quite rare, although it is actually very hard to find. But in our search for life around other planets, we're banking on the fact that life on Earth uses chemistry to extract energy from the environment, to store energy, and that life on Earth anyway releases gases into the atmosphere. So a few billion years ago, cyanobacteria on Earth discovered photosynthesis and eventually re-engineered our atmosphere to fill it with oxygen. Without vegetation and photosynthesis, our Earth would virtually have no oxygen in its atmosphere. So if there is an intelligent alien species orbiting a planet around a nearby star with the kind of telescopes we're hoping to build, and they look back at Earth and see that our atmosphere has 20% oxygen by volume, the aliens will be highly suspicious that we might have life on our planet Earth. So for today, I'm going to be talking about exoplanets first, then I'll get to Phosphine on Venus, followed by next steps. So as our hostess was saying, I actually will have a prize for the best question. And this is my new memoir, which describes a journey through outer space and also one through inner space. But because I am aware that many of my astronomy colleagues from around the world are also listening in, I have a second prize actually for the best, what I call technical question. Now this book has a lot of physics. It has derivations and physics from all topics of exoplanets. So I hope you enjoy these books. So on to my first topic. I have some kind of introductory information first before I get, and I'll have a few technical details mixed in. So in our search for signs of life, we want to eventually find another planet like our own. The problem is not so much that an Earth itself is so hard to find, but that the Earth is right next to a big, bright, massive sun. So I want you to imagine for a moment, I'm actually ready for poll 1, that your job now is to try to help find another Earth. But I want you to know that our Earth is 100 times smaller than our sun. It is 300,000 times less massive and 10 billion times fainter than our sun. So if my host is able to launch poll number 1, please go ahead, because I was going to ask you in the audience, which technique would you choose? Would you choose one that involves planet size? That's the most favorable combination. It's poll number 1 you're voting for here. Or would you choose the method that involves mass? Would you choose a method that involves planet brightness? So just for if you don't make measurements, it's so hard to make a measurement 1 part in 10 billion. Almost no one on the planet Earth has ever made a measurement to that many decimal places. All right, it looks like about 39%. Oh, people haven't voted. We might have we're getting a vote here. So far people are heavily voting for planet mass. Okay, let's see what's going on with the poll. So actually people are also answering my poll number 2, which we'll come back to later. It looks like right now, the winner for which planet finding method would you choose is actually looking like number 2, planet mass. Okay, we can end the poll and let's see if the results will display. My favorite one, by the way, is the 1 part in 10 billion. the reflected light. And I might be able to get to that in the Q&A if you ask me a question. A lot of people voted for planet mass, still harder. There's no right answer here, but the method astronomers are using most commonly today actually is the easiest one. The method that involves planet size. All right, thank you. We can stop sharing the poll now. And here I'm showing you, for those that don't know what a transiting planet is, I'm showing you an artist's conception, showing you the planet going in front of the star. Can you see that planet going in front of the star? And on the bottom, it shows you the transit, what we actually measure. So we measure a planet star brightness. The star's brightness is a function of time, looking for that tiny drop in brightness that shows a planet is going in front of the star. I actually just stepped down from my job as Deputy Science Director of the MIT-led NASA mission TESS. And TESS stares at a giant strip of the sky, 24 by 94 degrees. And TESS monitors 20,000 stars at high cadence and another 1,000,000 stars at low cadence, and downlinks all that data to Earth once a month. And the TESS team finds 100 new planet candidates every month with the transit technique. It's a very popular technique. So it turns out we try to make our life even easier in exoplanets. And we do that by actually not just trying to find an Earth around a sun, but focusing on small stars, small red dwarf stars. And here's a real image of our sun with a fake planet in front of it, the size of Earth. And on the right side, I'm showing you a small star, a fake image of a small star. That particular star is actually called TRAPPIST-1. It's a very small, very cold star. Any smaller and colder, and it actually wouldn't be able to have fusion inside. It wouldn't be called a star. But you can see the same size planet on it cuts out a much bigger area. Its planet to star area ratio, that is the transit depth, the drop in brightness, is about 1 part in 100, which is actually relatively straightforward to measure. For our Earth and Sun, that value would be 1 part in 10,000. We're interested in studying the atmospheres of exoplanets. And the atmosphere is so tiny. It's like the skin of an onion on an onion. And for a red dwarf star, the planet atmosphere might cut out 1 part in 10,000. But on a sun-like star, it's a much harder thing to observe. So your takeaway here is that most of our focus in exoplanets and the search for life is on planets transiting very small stars. To explain that to you a bit further, let's go on a journey to a small planet orbiting a small red dwarf star. This is an artist's conception, but I want you to imagine for a moment we were able to get in a spaceship and travel to this planet. First of all, the sun or the star might be very big in the sky because the red dwarf stars give off very little energy. So like the analogy of if you have a very small campfire, you have to be very close to stay warm. The planet has to be quite close to the star. Now, a consequence of the closeness to the star is that strong tides from the star on the planet do something strange to that planet. Like on Earth here, we have ocean tides, but over time, the planet would go into a very special orbit. Just like our moon shows the same face to Earth at all times, the planet would rotate 1 time for every time it orbits. What this means is that one side of the planet is always in daylight and one side's always in night. So if we could be visiting this planet, you could choose. Would you visit where it's always daytime? Or if you're an astronomer, you would want to go where it's always night, permanent night. Radio astronomers could probably choose where they want to go. Another thing about these planets is so close to the star by Kepler's third law, they orbit the star very quickly. So 1 year might only be about 10 days long. Now, on second thought, it wouldn't be such a great idea to get in a spaceship and visit these planets if we could even do that. These red dwarf stars have flares, lots of flares. So we couldn't flip out our phones, be constantly using them, because the high energy radiation would destroy our phone's electronics. What kind of sunscreen would we bring? Some of these red dwarf stars have flares equivalent to the giantest flare we've ever received on Earth from our sun. It was called the Carrington event. And they're receiving flares like that, something like once every 80 days. Actually, the TRAPPIST-1 star appears to have giant flares once every 80 days. So although we're focusing on M-dwarf stars because they're easier to find planets around and study the atmospheres, we're not 100% sure that they're the best places to look for life, mostly because of the flares on those stars. So I still have a bit more background info for this talk, and I wanted to share with you how we study exoplanet atmospheres today, the main way that we study exoplanet atmospheres. You'll see on the top right, the artist's conception of a planet in front of its star. This is a transiting planet. Planets are aligned just so that the planet goes in front of the star as seen from the telescope. Well, this is showing you a glowing atmosphere, and that atmosphere is being backlit by the star. And that's the artist's conception of what's happening. We actually measure the star by itself, then we measure the star with the planet in front of the star, and we're able to subtract that, and through a lot of careful, complicated data analysis, get out a signal of the planet atmosphere. Now I want to take like 1 or 2 minutes. This is for the casual enthusiasts out there, to explain to you like a somewhat complicated concept. And that is that I want you to imagine this planet being observed for its atmosphere at a wavelength where the atmosphere is completely transparent. In that case, the planet has a fixed certain size as superimposed on a star. Now imagine that we're observing the planet at a wavelength where a molecule of interest is very strongly absorbing. Now the atmosphere is no longer transparent. It's now blocking light, and the planet will look a tiny bit bigger. That's the whole concept behind studying exoplanet atmospheres. I know that was a little complex, so you don't have to understand this to understand the rest of the talk, but I wanted to share with my astronomy colleagues like this kind of cherry pick best case scenario, one of our best transmission spectra for transiting planets. This is a hot Saturn exoplanet. It's very low density. It has an incredibly puffy atmosphere, so it ends up getting a very big signal. What you're seeing here is the transit depth. You can think of that as kind of like the planet size as a function of wavelength in microns. So the left part of the plot, leftmost part of the plot is visible wavelengths. The middle is near infrared. The white points are Hubble Space Telescope data points. And the curves, the colored curves, are models. Now, what you see in the middle there is a up and down. You're seeing a feature of water vapor, actually. And remember what I said before, that the planet looks a tiny bit larger at wavelengths where the atmosphere is strongly absorbing. This giant planet has water vapor. It doesn't have water oceans. It just has hydrogen and oxygen, which on a giant planet want to be in water form. And you have to see this plot. If you don't understand anything I said, then all you have to do is agree with me that the white points in the plot are different from a straight line. And if you agree with that, you're actually agreeing that this planet has an atmosphere that happens to have water vapor in the atmosphere. Now, each molecule more or less has a special fingerprint. And if you look at the model here and some of the data, you'll see like several features from water vapor. And it looks like at least 2 or 3 of them are well marked out by the data. This feature, by the way, the big feature in the middle, if you were to read the y-axis and try to guess, like eyeball how strong that signal is, it's about 1 part in 1,000. And from one of my previous slides, I mentioned that for a small red dwarf planet, the atmosphere signal is about 1 part in 10,000 for a small planet orbiting transiting a red dwarf star. So we still have to do way better. Now, it turns out that today, one of our workhorses for exoplanets is the Hubble Space Telescope, which we use to study hot giant exoplanet atmospheres. Soon we'll use the James Webb Space Telescope to push to much smaller exoplanet rocky atmospheres. Now, there are literally hundreds of astronomers in the exoplanet community who are planning to use the James Webb Space Telescope. In good news, an article crossed my newsfeed today saying that the James Webb Space Telescope is still on schedule to launch in 2021. That's next year. And the bad news is astronomers were still working out just how well we think the James Webb Space Telescope can do for small rocky planet atmospheres. 1 part in 10,000, 1 part in 100,000. It's a very, very, very tiny signal. We'll have to wait and see how the first round of data does, but we're all pinning our hopes on trying to be able to study those small rocky planet atmospheres. In this picture, I'm just showing you the NASA mission TESS. It won't be with James Webb. It's just here to remind me to tell you that TESS is very busy finding these small planets transiting small stars. So now the question is, when we are able to study small rocky planet atmospheres, what kind of gases do we want to look for? We want to know, yes, actually there was a question about this. We'd like to know what gases should we look for? I already mentioned oxygen, where oxygen fills our atmosphere to 20% by volume. But it turns out that on our planet, oxygen was only significant at 20% by volume for the last billion years. That actually sounds like a long time, 1 billion years, but Earth has been around for 4.5 billion years. So we don't really know on an exoplanet what molecules we should consider. Now, my second poll question, which we don't have to do again, but I asked you, have you received a crazy theory? Have you sent a crazy theory? Please don't send me your crazy theory. In physics and astronomy, we get crazy theories every day. So we had a 75% response that said people had received a crazy theory. And we had a 25% response saying you sent a crazy theory. So I was pondering this question, what kind of gases should we really be thinking about? And I came up with my own crazy theory. And that crazy theory was that perhaps all molecules that are in the gas phase, perhaps they're all produced by life. When I thought about the molecules I knew before I studied, this was before I had to study chemistry all over again. Like humans, we breathe out carbon dioxide. Ozone is actually made inside some cells. Life makes nitrogen and nitrous oxide and methane and all the gases I could think of. Well, who does the MIT professor go to with the crazy theory? I could actually spam everyone I know, but I had to go to the next highest level, to a Nobel laureate. And I actually had recruited 2 biochemistry colleagues to work on this theory. And we actually went across the river. This is before the pandemic when we actually went to work, but we worked on our theory. We had some slides. We asked this Nobel laureate, his name's Jack Szostak, and he Nobel laureate in medicine. So we went and asked him about biology. And it was really interesting because we presented the theory that perhaps all life makes all molecules. And he crushed the theory. He actually found a counterexample, a simple molecule that is definitely not made by life. And we were crushed. Well, we went back to work and still wanted to make a giant list of molecules. What are all the molecules we should think about? How could we filter them? And this image now is showing you a sea of molecules because we did a giant combinatorics literature search. And we came up with the point that there are actually well over 14,000 molecules that are in gas form at Earth's temperature, room temperature, and pressure. And we actually filtered all of these. We found that about 1/4 of them are made by life on Earth. So it's not all, but it's still a large amount. And we have very complicated algorithms that work through which molecules are of interest, which are not. We want to be prepared for any kind of biosignature gas detection. And it's a little too detailed to get through this. Actually, there's no possible way I could explain all the years of work and algorithms that went into here. Suffice to say, we made some really interesting findings with our giant database. One of them is not related to astronomy in any way, but it is that some molecules or molecular fragments appear to be never made by life. We're following that up as a non-astronomy project. But a large part of this database now, either molecule by molecule or giant classes of molecules that could take care of hundreds of molecules, my team is studying as biosignature gases. And one of them, the more interesting ones we came up with, that checked all the boxes for useful biosignature gas, that is, has unique spectral features, that is likely doesn't seem to have any false positives, that is actually can accumulate in an atmosphere of some kind and is actually detectable. One of the first ones from this giant database we started working on was phosphine gas. So phosphine is a really interesting gas. I'm kind of guessing that a lot of you, at least until our host or hostess introduced the talk, you might not even have heard of phosphine. It is a gas that actually It's a very interesting gas, but first of all, phosphine is a phosphorus atom, and it's attached to 3 hydrogen atoms. So on a planet like Earth, where we have oxygen and carbon dioxide, phosphorus usually wants to be with oxygen. It doesn't want to go with hydrogen. So phosphine is a gas that people don't usually talk about. They don't usually hear about it. The element phosphorus, all life needs it. We usually use it as phosphate, which is a phosphorus attached to oxygen atoms. Phosphine initially in our database, it initially at least appeared to be almost completely absent from biology. Life hardly ever appears to use or produce phosphine. And so when we first started looking into phosphine, we had to deal with a couple of major arguments against phosphine as a biosignature gas. One of them is that phosphine is very toxic and unstable. It turns out that phosphine actually was used as one of many, one of dozens and dozens of gases as chemical warfare in World War I. The other one people like to complain about against phosphine is that there's no actually confirmed species that produces phosphine. So it turns out that in terms of it being toxic and unstable, that is really true, but it turns out only to be true in oxidized environments. In terms of not being produced by any life, we don't know exactly which species of life. It looks like it's some kind of strain of E. coli that produces phosphine, but there's incredibly strong evidence. People take cultures of mixed bacteria into the laboratory, and they've measured phosphine coming off of that. People have also found phosphine gas coming off of environments where there is life. These are oxygen-free environments, such as wetlands or sludges. And phosphine has been found in the guts of many different animals. It's actually in guts, they find it in feces. In fact, there's a funny study saying that phosphine is a very high concentration in penguin poop over penguin colonies. Once I got to go to Chile, and I actually got to see some penguins. I understand there are some penguins in South Africa, so you could test out this theory of phosphine being very strong over penguin colonies if you ever get to visit a very concentrated colony. So what we do in exoplanets, and by the way, you don't have to understand this graph to understand the rest of the talk. We make complicated simulations of exoplanet atmospheres. And we simulate the noise budget that we might expect with the James Webb Space Telescope. And what you're seeing right now is transit depth as a function of, so you can think of then GAT as a proxy for planet size as a function of wavelength in microns. So this is mostly the infrared. And the purple area is one instrument on the James Webb, the green area is another. You're supposed to, by eye, compare the white curve and white symbols with the blue curve and light blue curve and light blue symbols, to the top versus the bottom. And the bigger features are what happens when the atmosphere has phosphine in it. Now, it might look like by eye that you could see that if that turns out that our data is as good as this data, that could be a really great signal. But if you look at the y-axis, you'll see it's a very tiny amount. It's going to be a challenge. Now, the one thing that we've discovered in all of our computer simulations of biosignature gases is that a lot of the gases that are not big on Earth, they can accumulate in an atmosphere without oxygen, because oxygen's byproducts are terrible for gases. The hydroxyl radical OH, it is the garbage eater of our atmosphere and literally destroys almost every molecule. So we like atmospheres that don't have oxygen because we're finding that gases can accumulate much more easily. But a major negative we're finding, just for my astronomy colleagues out there, it's kind of depressing to admit this out loud, but it may not be surprising to you, is we're finding that to have a hope of detecting a biosignature gas, life would have had to re-engineer the atmosphere, like the cyanobacteria did for oxygen on Earth. We would need a life form. It's not going to be penguins with penguin poop, but we need some kind of life form that can produce so much gas, huge amounts of gas, that could help re-engineer the atmosphere. And so a kind of quantitative way to look at that is the gas molecule that would be the biosignature has to be produced faster than anything destroying it. So that's usually related to the ultraviolet photons coming from the star that would break up a molecule, create a radical that would destroy the gas. And we're finding this with a lot of, and so by the way, for phosphine in this image, we need a huge amounts of phosphine, 10 to 100 times more than the amount of methane being produced every year on Earth, but actually less than what's over a penguin colony. And so just to kind of conclude this biosignature gas summary for part of the talk, this is showing you a bar chart of the blue bars are gases my team has studied recently. The yellow bars are Earth's level. And the units on the y-axis are, it's the biological surface flux, like how fast is life producing it as a rate. You can just kind of eyeball the curves though. And on the bottom, it's telling you the different gases we've studied: phosphine, isoprene, ammonia, and it's comparing it to oxygen. So you see for the blue bars, in every case we've studied so far, we need way, way more gas produced by life on another planet than the gas that's being produced by life on Earth, actually. So all this is still going on. There are other groups around the world working on biosignatures. We'll just have to keep chugging along. All right, so now perhaps the moment some of you have been waiting for. What if we search for phosphine much closer to Earth? Okay, this is a pretty interesting story that I'm going to launch into. Because unbeknownst to my team, we'd been working on phosphine for a number of years, and it's pretty obscure for astronomers, let alone anyone, to be working, even biologists, to be working on phosphine. We had no idea, but there was another person working on phosphine, and that is Professor Jane Greaves. Professor Jane Greaves actually found some obscure biological papers that did say that phosphine is associated with life on Earth. And by the way, I forgot to mention, it's not produced any other way on Earth. It's produced by us humans as like an insecticide, but it's actually not able to form on Earth's temperatures and pressures on its own. So Professor Greaves read about that, and she very boldly, purposefully decided to search for phosphine gas on Venus. And she applied to the James Clerk Maxwell Telescope, which I've got to visit, by the way, in Hawaii. It's on a mountaintop in Hawaii. And her proposal was first rejected, actually, because, you know, it's a crazy idea to look for life on Venus. It's considered incredibly fringe and just not really a thing to do. So she did, the second time around, actually get time on the telescope, and she found a signal of phosphine. And as Professor Jane Greaves tells us, she was more surprised than anybody. But the signal was actually somewhat weak, so she needed to get a stronger signal. Around that time, a mutual contact connected my team, and there's a lot of people on my team working on this with Professor Jane Greaves' team. And so we all worked together to write a proposal to ALMA, a much larger radio observatory, high in the deserts of Chile, above all the water vapor that causes trouble for radio observatories. I haven't got to visit Chile. I would actually love to go and see ALMA. It's so high up. I understand it's like 17,000 feet, where it's very hard to breathe. It's purposely at one of the highest, driest places on Earth. And it's just an incredible facility. ALMA has about 66 telescopes. 50 of them are the main array. Each of them have about 12-meter diameter, and they act together as a single telescope. Now, most people don't observe solar system planets with it, so it's not a common thing to do. But we helped Jane with a successful proposal to ALMA to look for phosphine, and we found phosphine gas. And now I'm going to tell you a bit more about that. So Venus is a very crazy planet. We actually used to call it our sister planet because it's about the same mass and size as Earth. But Venus is a very hostile place for life. Due to a massive carbon dioxide greenhouse atmosphere, Venus's surface temperature is so hot, it's 700 Kelvin. No life could ever survive at the surface. But starting with Carl Sagan over half a century ago, people have been speculating about life on Venus. And this is because away from the surface, above the surface, far above the surface at about 50 to 60 kilometers, Venus has the right temperatures for life. Not too hot, not too cold, just right for life. And this cartoon is showing you Venus's atmosphere. If you look on the left, it's showing you altitude in kilometers, going from 0 to 100 kilometers. The cartoon image is showing you the cloud deck up where that's where people have speculated there's life. But it's still an incredibly nasty environment because we do think that life needs some kind of liquid to survive so that chemical reactions can happen. But in this Venus cloud deck, there are not water droplets, but there's acid droplets, hydrosulfuric acid, which no life as we know it could survive there. Nonetheless, we did find phosphine in the atmosphere. Now I'm going to just explain this for a moment, but what we're seeing in this, I'll explain this figure in a moment, but what's going on is that the sunlight hits Venus, some of it gets to the atmosphere and surface and heats it up. Just like if you go outside on a hot summer day, the pavement can be extremely hot. And the pavement isn't hot because it has its own like energy source. It's the sun that has heated it up, but the pavement is giving off heat. So Venus's surface and atmosphere are giving off heat from reprocessed sunlight. That's what we're measuring actually. But within that heat coming off of Venus, there are absorption features where gases are removing some of that radiation from our view. And this plot here is showing you on the x-axis, you can think of it as frequency, but in radio astronomy, astronomers typically like to use velocity instead. And the y-axis is a normalized, L to C means line to continuum ratio, where continuum is this average, the average value kind of going across 0. And the line ratio, the line is that drop in brightness that you're seeing. So what's interesting here is that, actually I put a few notes on the side for you to read. But again, just to oversimplify this, is that if there were no phosphine on Venus, this would be a straight line effectively. The fact that there's a drop in the signal at exactly the frequency where phosphine absorbs is why we're claiming we have found phosphine on Venus. Now, a lot of work went into getting this spectrum. It was years and years of work from Professor Jane Greaves, her team, ALMA experts, and a lot of people have contributed this. And I'm going to come back to this figure in a moment. And I know there's a lot of good questions, and I will come back to those. We'll have a good amount of time for questions at the end. Now, one immediate point to make is that phosphine does exist on Jupiter and Saturn. These planets, we always think of Jupiter as being a very cold planet, but in fact, not too far beneath Jupiter's atmosphere, it's actually incredibly hot. The atmosphere traps energy that Jupiter had since it was born, energy that's been slowly leaking out throughout its billions of years of existence. Well, right beneath that atmosphere, it's very hot, pressures are high, and there's a lot of hydrogen because Jupiter's whole composition is dominated by hydrogen. And so phosphine wants to form. It doesn't need life. The temperatures, pressures, and amount of hydrogen are all there to make phosphine. Well, our team had to work through a lot of scenarios to find out why might there be phosphine on Venus. We thought about volcanoes and surface minerals. I have a lot of notes here. It's not have time to go into all the details. I just wanted you to know that the team has really thoroughly considered all possibilities, and we haven't found any that are able to produce phosphine at the levels we have measured. You know, lightning's another one we looked at. It just turns out that Venus, like Earth, is what we call oxidized. Venus doesn't have oxygen in its atmosphere, but it has carbon dioxide. And everything we know about the planet points to there being enough oxygen around that all the elements want to be in their oxygenated form. So that's why it's so hard to produce phosphorus no matter what no matter what scenario you want to consider. Meteors, we also thought about that meteoritic delivery. You know, we get tons of meteoritic material a year, as does Venus, and these could actually add some phosphorus element. But even then, it's not enough to populate the atmosphere with phosphine. And in our paper, we actually worked out all the quantitative numbers for you. So it always falls short by sometimes, in this case, 100 million times. So yeah, so we do have a lot of really good questions. And just to summarize the Venus phosphine part of the talk, we're not claiming we have found life on Venus. we are claiming that we have detected phosphine gas whose existence is a mystery. Either it's unknown chemistry or possibly life production. Because remember, on Earth, phosphine is only associated with life. So just to quickly go through, that we were overwhelmed when we announced this. Hundreds and hundreds of people all around the world wrote to all of the different team members. A lot of them were people we knew saying, wow, this is awesome. But probably more were, oh, you forgot about this, or what about that? And there were people who, not surprisingly, they didn't have time to read the paper in detail, to absorb everything. We had been thinking about this for some of us 2 years, some of the team 5 years, and people had only had 5 hours. They went kind of crazy on us. And it's still been going on all in the last month. So one of the criticism was there's only one line. If you remember back to the transmission spectra I showed you, we saw a lot of different water vapor features. We want to see more than one line. But unfortunately, ALMA only has one line. One of our friends invented a new term for us called chemsplaining. Everyone wants to send us their favorite theory, and that's great, because science, we want it. We'd be, I don't know if happy is the right word, happy or sad or both, that if we can find a way to explain the presence of phosphine on Venus by chemistry, we're welcoming people to have theories. Check the papers, write your own paper, get it peer reviewed. We get the contaminant question. It could be a contaminant. Again, we worked really hard to rule out any other molecules. We actually didn't find that there are any that are absorbing at the same frequency as phosphine, any molecules or isotopes of molecules present in Venus's atmosphere. Now, just a quick aside to this is that when we work in the optical and infrared, especially the infrared actually, there are so many lines. Molecules are rotating and vibrating, like molecules are rotating and vibrating, and it's such a crowded field. But out in the radio, typically things are much more spread out because we're only seeing rotational features, not rotational vibrational features. Now, this last one, it's too much to unpack here today, but there's very specific criticisms about the data analysis. I want to reassure you that what the team has done is standard in the field for decades. We detected an expected line of deuterated water using the same procedure. And as a sanity check, we searched our data with the same process for absorption lines at other frequencies and found no signal. Now, some of you are, okay, so let me just, this is the kind of unplanned part of the talk. Well, some of you are on social media or AstroPH, that's the Astronomers. I know other people are too, but you'll be getting this in your feed, that today a team put on the archive an unrefereed paper saying that they had reanalyzed the ALMA data using this kind of slightly different process. And they're claiming they did not find phosphine. They did not find phosphine gas. Well, I'm not going to be able to respond to that point by point. I just want you to know that it's sort of a very natural thing in science where one team says we found this, and then everyone else is trying to say, you didn't find this, or you didn't find that, or it's this chemistry, or it's that chemistry. So this will all take some time to play out. I do have a really exciting, reassuring point of information to share with you though. And that is that a team went back and looked at Pioneer Venus data that hadn't been looked at before. It hadn't been checked for any signs of phosphine. And this particular instrument actually, it blew apart all the molecules and it looked at what fragments of molecules, what ions were present. And they found 3 or 4 fragments of phosphine that could only be associated with phosphine. So we actually do have some corroborating evidence, but big discoveries of this kind, they take a long time to settle out in the community. So next steps. I'm so proud to be leading a concept study for a mission to go to Venus and to look in the atmosphere directly. We're actually studying 3 separate ideas. One is what we call small mission, one is medium, one is large. The small one, we are planning to team up with Rocket Lab, who have already claimed that they're going to launch a mission to Venus in the year 2023, which for space is actually very, very soon. This mission would be small in that the payload, the actual scientific instrument aboard the survey craft, would only be about 3 kilograms. That's actually really tiny. But we could send a tiny spectrometer that could look in the atmosphere directly for phosphine and other gases. Our medium mission and our large mission is inspired by the Russia Vega balloon missions, where there's a model shown on the right picture. And this balloon has a payload, that's the thing dropping off the bottom. And our large mission concept could even include a microscope. So in the meantime, astronomers are using ground-based telescopes at infrared wavelengths to also try to search for phosphine. But ultimately, only going to the Venus atmosphere directly will help us figure out what's next. Okay, so I just have a couple more slides. I just wanted to say that for exoplanets, I didn't have time to get into this part of my talk, but we have a wealth of new telescopes waiting to observe small planet atmospheres. But I wanted to just, summarize by saying that it's an incredible time for discovery. This plot is showing us on a log scale distance away from our sun. There are the terrestrial planets close to the sun. There's Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune further away. And all of our planets many of them have renewed interest as astrobiological sites. But beyond our solar system, there are Voyager 1 and Voyager 2, which are still making new discoveries. And outside of our solar system are the very nearest stars, the ones we're trying to find planets around, that are around bright enough hosts so we can get enough photons to search for signs of life. So to summarize, there are thousands of exoplanets are known to orbit nearby stars. Small rocky planets are established to be common. We have next generation telescopes that I mentioned focused on the James Webb Space Telescope that will give us our first capability of observing atmospheres of small planets for water vapor and biosignature gases. Venus is the new frontier. Inspired by phosphine gas, there's a huge renewal on Venus. We hope that we've moved the needle so that current missions under competition, under study, will get a chance to go to Venus and find out what is really happening there. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Sarah. So what we have done, Sarah, is just to moderate and to group some of the questions. There were plenty of questions, and I think this could probably go on for quite a while. So what I've done is just to group them in terms of the types of questions and as they relate to your talk. And the first set of questions is really about the nature of life, as well as that the nature of life outside of our solar system. The first question is from Camille. Thank you. Camille has asked a lot of questions. The first is, how do you define what life is? What would molecules on another planet look like? How do we test for something that we don't yet know how to define?
Yes, then, well, would you like me to answer that one?
Oh, that's fine, continue.
So yes, we don't know how to define life. I personally don't. In astronomy, we cheat on that one and we don't bother answering it. All we say is that life metabolizes. At least life on Earth uses chemistry, and as a byproduct has gases. And so if there's some other kind of life or we don't know what it's made of, we're still hoping that we're assuming that life somewhere uses chemistry. And as long as that life outputs a gas that can accumulate in the atmosphere, we have a chance of detecting it. But all other kinds of life are off the table for us. Now, part B, when we talk about Venus specifically, now we have a new environment, sulfuric acid, which our own DNA, amino acids, and proteins cannot survive in. And there we can make some concrete steps to figure out what kind of life could survive there. We can do experiments where life might be inside a protective shell, like waxes or graphite or lipids. So that's a harder one. Stay tuned for an answer.
Okay. And then the question from Chris was, would it be reasonable to assume that microbial life found on Venus would be carbon-based?
We don't have any reason to not assume it's carbon-based. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of beyond what biologists can do today to, construct other life forms. But carbon is an incredibly common element and Venus has a lot of it. So it's probably a good starting assumption.
Okay. Shantali, I think Sarah has answered your question about, the elements we may not know are present, and how they would be invisible to our spectroscopes. Another question, is it possible for life to begin, exist, and die only in the atmosphere of Venus and never reach the surface of the planet?
That's a tough one. We don't know the answer to that. I think the favored theory is that if there's life on Venus, it has initiated on the surface a long time ago when Venus had water oceans. And as Venus warmed up and went through a catastrophic greenhouse, the oceans evaporated and life moved to the atmosphere. Here on Earth, by the way, we do have life in our atmosphere, bacteria floating around inside or outside cloud droplets, but it only stays up for a few days. So people do speculate on whether like meteorites could deliver material that gets absorbed in the clouds, and maybe that's enough to start life. But we don't have a worked out theory. So it is a really good, that's a really good question.
Okay. That was from Camille as well. From Julian, could the phosphine signals not be another chemical with the same absorption properties?
Right now, we don't have any, there are not any chemicals with the same absorption properties that are also present in the Venus atmosphere. So we have carefully done our very best to rule that out. And at radio wavelengths, most signatures of molecules are pretty spread out. So it's not super easy to have another molecule at exactly the same space, same place.
Okay. And then lastly, would it be possible to return a sample of the Venus atmosphere back to Earth for analysis? To test that atmosphere, very much like we saw the landing on an asteroid yesterday.
Right, the asteroid scooping up material, a big, huge thing, yeah. So technically, we could figure out if we had enough money and time to go to Venus and come back, but it's really hard to come back because you'd go to Venus, skim through the atmosphere, and you're already getting kind of entrapped by the planet's gravity. And your spaceship would have to have enough fuel to then zoom back out and get back to Earth. So we could do that, but they're incredibly sophisticated small instruments that have been developed primarily for Mars that we could take to Venus. We could get the liquid droplets, we could concentrate ingredients, and we could use the instruments to see what is there. So it's far more likely that that in situ exploration will happen rather than the harder part of returning the sample. You'd have to do some work anyway to concentrate because if life is there, it's probably incredibly diffuse. So you couldn't bring back, like a giant, huge, massive amount of air. You'd have to still concentrate it anyway.
Okay. So now on to some more philosophical or personal questions. How do you explain the importance of your groundbreaking work to your sons when they are under 10? And that comes from Heather.
Right. So right now, by the way, my sons are now teenagers, 15 and 17. So they've been somewhat spoiled because they've been to 3 or 4 rocket launches. They've seen the solar eclipse when it came here to America a few years ago. They've seen the green flash, the blue flash, the meteor shower. So I'm not sure if I was able to or even wanted to explain the significance of them when they were children. I just kind of let them, find their own way, ask and answers their own questions. It almost might have been they're too embedded in the field of astronomy to even really understand how significant it is. I remember one time going out for dinner with a friend and telling the kids, she's a black hole astrophysicist. Do you have any questions about black holes? And a lot of our social events were with other astrophysicists. So I think they had a bit of a skewed view of, or they really just took stuff in by osmosis.
Mm-hmm. Right, then a very philosophical question. Does an event like a pandemic make you, Sarah, even more interested in the universe or the galaxy, which is so enormous, much bigger than us and this virus? Or does it make you less interested because of the urgency of our problems on planet Earth seeming so enormous?
That's a good question too. Very challenging one, I think, for everybody. I'll have to say that both, actually. So there are days when I think I should just drop everything and focus on our own problems here on Earth because they're just big problems and growing. It's not just the pandemic, it's the climate, it's overpopulation. And all of these issues, are probably somehow intertwined. So it's definitely a tough one. On the other hand, I love outer space. And it really helps to give us a sense of perspective, that it's really sad, but no matter what happens here on Earth, we could destroy ourselves, destroy the human race, destroy the planet, Earth will survive. It will still be here 1 billion years from now. So I don't know if that's sort of cheery or depressing. But the other thing I always try to keep in mind, and it's not necessarily saying that about my own work, but pure science is really needed to make huge improvements elsewhere. If you think about like antibiotics or lasers that we use for laparoscopic surgery, or GPS we all rely on now, all the ginormous advances were from people doing pure science. You need so much pure science to happen just to get these important advances. So I try to kind of keep a mix of all those 3 things in my mind.
Okay. Right, so onto some more, questions about methodology. From Villy, since the transit method only works when the orbit of an exoplanet lines up without line of sight, what percentage of exoplanets do we think we are not seeing?
We are not seeing most exoplanets, actually. And we have a formula for this, that the probability for a planet to be transiting is the size of the star over the planet's distance from the star. So if you were my class, I could give that to you as an assignment for like a little break. But for a planet very close to a sun-sized star, the probability is 10% to transit. So that's pretty high, I guess. We're getting 10% of all planets. It's not exactly that, but about that. But if there's a planet at Earth's distance from a sun-like star, only 1 in 200 will show a transit. In that case, we're missing most of them. So on the whole, it's very few that line up properly.
Which is incredible. Just the thought of what is out there. Right, so this is from Brian. Given the Hubble Space Telescope resolution, how far have we been able to search for life, and will we be able to search further, say out to Andromeda?
That's a good question, actually. So, there are, despite the fact that our galaxy has hundreds of billions of stars, and yes, we have these, here in the Northern Hemisphere, we can't see the Andromeda, we can't, sorry, I was thinking of Magellanic Clouds. We can only find planets in our own galaxy right now. So it's nearly impossible to find planets in Andromeda, in the Magellanic Clouds, anywhere else. And so if we can't find them, we can't search for their signs of life in the atmospheres. Now, it's even more difficult, actually, because when we think about searching for signs of life, we need a bright host star. We need the planet, the star, to be as close to our Earth as possible. Because the signal is so weak, we need as many photons as we can get. So it's not even that we're not searching another galaxy. We're only searching our own neighborhood. This would be like you knowing that there are billions of people all around the globe, but you can only meet people on your block and the 2 surrounding blocks.
That's insane. Okay. From Camille, is there any correlation we can make between possible phosphine detection on Venus's atmosphere and the most recently possible detection of glycine in the Venus atmosphere? Could the presence of these give further clues for possible life on the planet?
They could give possible clues. We're still trying to sort through all the new results on Venus that are coming out, so we need some more time for synthesis.
Okay. From Jose, most exoplanet transit surveys are heavily biased to finding hot Jupiters or planets orbiting close to their host stars with relatively short periods. If one was looking at the sun from another star, Earth would only transit once a year. Are you aware of any surveys in the future that will do long-term observation in the order of years of the same part of the sky to try and find these exoplanets orbiting far from their host stars?
Okay, that has to be one of my favorite questions because it's about one of my projects. So let me explain a little more. It turns out that the Kepler Space Telescope, which is now retired, it stared at one part of the sky for 4 years. And so Kepler was able to find planets with periods over 3 years. So that has happened already, and you can look that up, and Kepler found small planets. It didn't find an Earth-sized planet around a sun-like star, but it couldn't, it had some problems and couldn't reach that. There's the TESS mission. TESS only looks at a strip of the sky for a month. There's a mission coming up called Plato, run by ESA. And Plato, it won't look for many years, but it will look for 6 months or longer at one given field. So to describe to you one of my projects, our goal is to put up a fleet of small satellites, little telescopes. And each telescope would look at one bright star, a bright sun-like star. And it would look at this star for a few years, looking for a transiting Earth, an Earth-sized planet in a Earth-like orbit about a sun-like star. And when the star would go behind the sun, the telescope would not be able to observe it, but there'd be lots of telescopes able to pick up where one left off if needed. Now, my project, our prototype, we called Asteria, was a CubeSat in low Earth orbit that launched in 2017, and it survived for 2 years, demonstrating technology of how we would point a small satellite extremely precisely in order to be able to monitor a star with enough precision to find another Earth. So we managed to get that done. So the short answer is no, there's nothing. longer answers, there's a few things in the works.
Okay. So look out for those. Right, there's some general questions from Carol. Why do M dwarfs have more and larger flares than our sun?
Okay, just a second. So M dwarfs actually, they have more activity because, okay, that's a good question. I have to sort of collect my thoughts. It's one of those questions I should know the answer to, but I don't have it on the tip of my tongue right now. So M dwarf stars just have more activity than our sun and other stars. They just have a more active phase. They have more convection. And yeah, I don't have the specific answer for you.
Okay. Right, then some questions from Vaynant. Do you plan to make use of SpaceX or Elon Musk's funds? We all wish we had access to those. Search for outer space life.
So we'd all love to get access to Elon Musk's funds, actually. We have already benefited from Elon Musk. The test mission launched aboard a SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket, and the price tag was significantly lower, actually, with his rocket than other rockets that existed that could have carried tests to outer space. So as long as he can keep his prices down, we're already benefiting. Of course, we hope in the future he might throw in a free launch to one of our projects, but we'll have to wait and see.
While he's launching Starlink. Right. Then from Sonal, a curious question, she said. What is the possibility that life came to Earth from meteorites or distant comets?
Well, people love the idea of panspermia, that life originated somewhere else and came to Earth from, by delivery from the outside. And by the way, that's one of the theories for Venus. There's the question on how could life have originated in Venus's atmosphere? People like to speculate that perhaps it somehow came from Earth aboard a meteorite. But on Earth, it didn't have to. We don't need that theory. We know that our Earth has had and has all the ingredients for life. So we usually don't fall back on that idea.
Okay. And then the last question, which I think you've probably received many times also from Vaynant, is if there is life outside of Earth, why haven't we already made contact with that? So I don't know if you want to talk about the nature of life.
I think each person here could have their own answer to that, really. I'll just give you my favorite one because I love to imagine that there actually is life and intelligent life out there. Because the idea that perhaps there's no life at all is just, and no intelligent life is just really, it's just a lonely thought. So my theory that I like is that I liken it to ants. I'm sure you've each had an ant invasion in your home, or you see them outside. Sometimes you see like hundreds of them all clumped together. Those ants are pretty sophisticated. They send some ants out for reconnaissance. If they find a bit of cat food or something, then a whole lot of them come flooding in. But I want you to imagine for a moment, you're going to talk to those ants. Like, what would you say to them? Could you communicate that we have found a signal of phosphine on Venus? Like, how would you explain the universe to those ants? So I love imagining that the intelligent aliens that are out there are so beyond us. As we are to the ants, they are to us. And there's just not really any point. They have no motivation to come in and visit us because we're just not ready for them.
As Neil deGrasse Tyson says, why would they come looking for us anyway? Right, so that brings our question session to a close. I am going to, Sarah, while you think about your two favorite questions, just encourage our audience. Kika, I think is how you pronounce it, especially who asked about the asteroid that's due to to hit the Earth the day before the US elections. That's actually asteroid 2018 VP1. And I could tell you more, but I'm going to encourage you to reach out to the South African Astronomical Observatory. One of the telescopes, NASA telescopes, actually looking out for asteroids, that might be on the collision course with Earth, which is called Atlas, is actually stationed at the SAO, as well as at other stations around the world. So reach out to the SAO, and if you have any other questions about what Sarah talked about today, or just astronomy and space sciences in general, reach out to your local observatories, reach out to the media houses that talk about astronomy quite often, and ask them all these important questions. Sarah, do you have winners for your questions?
I do, actually. So the first winner, which I'm going to give my memoir to, is to Camille. Because first, Camille asked a lot of questions, but I love the question, can life originate, live, and die all in the atmosphere of Venus or any atmosphere? And for the technical question, and I hope the book is not too technical, but I'm going to give that to Jose, who asked about, are there missions in the future that could look at a part of the sky for a long time? Because that was a very astute question. You know, it sort of built off the one about, are transits rare or not? And how will we get to those rare ones that are far from the star and that don't have very many planets that are actually transiting?
Well, congratulations to those two for the questions. So what I am going to do if I'm able to, is just in the panelists and attendees, for Camille and Jose, is just to put an email address, which is for the manager of SciFest Africa. And if you could send your details to Freddie, he will, make sure that everything is coordinated and that you receive your signed copies of those two books. So that brings to close our session today with Sarah. Sarah, I know that you're in great demand at the moment in terms of public speaking and science communication. Thank you very, very much for making time for our colleagues and our audiences in South Africa, but also around the world. We really do appreciate the time that you've given us, and good luck in your work with the breakthrough initiatives.
Thank you so much all for attending. And I'd like to finish by congratulating the South African Astronomical Observatory for your 200th year anniversary.
Yeah. Congratulations from all of us in the astronomy world. Right, that ends our session today. Thank you very much, everyone.
David Dunlop that used to work at,
right.
I used to operate too, right?